Amira Khalid pushed through another grueling shift at the hospital, her legs aching and her mind swirling with numbers. The financial reports were grim, far worse than she'd feared. She'd spent her lunch break poring over spreadsheets in Dr. Farid's office, trying to spot some overlooked way to salvage the hospital's dwindling budget. The pediatric ward was full that day, as usual. Amira walked past a young boy in a wheelchair, his frail body dwarfed by the oversized blanket wrapped around him. His mother sat beside him, exhaustion etched into her face. They'd been regulars for months now, relying on the hospital's generosity to cover costs. "Miss Khalid, are we still safe here?" the mother asked hesitantly, clutching the blanket as if it could shield her from the storm. Amira forced a smile. "We're doing everything we can to keep this place running. I promise." She wished her words felt more like a promise and less like a fragile hope. As she entered the break room, Dr. Farid appeared, his face grim. "Amira, there's someone in reception asking for you." "He's not a patient." Her heart sank further. The last thing she needed was another argument with an unhappy donor or a frustrated supplier. "Did he say why?" "No. But he looks important." Curious, Amira smoothed her scrubs and walked toward reception. The man waiting there was impossible to ignore. He stood tall, his suit immaculately tailored, his posture exuding authority. His sharp, dark eyes locked onto her as she approached, and Amira felt a flicker of unease. "Miss Khalid?" he asked, his voice deep and deliberate. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "My name is Zaid Al-Fad. I believe we can help each other," he said, his tone leaving no room for ambiguity. Amira blinked, trying to decipher his intentions. "What do you mean?" "I understand your hospital is in dire need of funding," Zaid said. "I can provide that funding on one condition." Her wariness deepened. "What condition?" Zaid studied her for a moment before speaking. "A marriage. Not a real one, at least not in the traditional sense. A contract. You would become my wife in name only and care for my niece, Layla, who recently lost her parents. In return, I'll secure your hospital's future." The weight of his words pressed on her chest. A marriage? To a stranger? She opened her mouth to respond, but found herself speechless. "I understand this is unconventional," Zaid added, "but I need someone I can trust with Layla. You're compassionate, professional, and, most importantly, unattached. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Amira's head spun. She dedicated her life to her work, driven by a desire to help those in need. But this offer, it felt like stepping into someone else's life entirely. "I need time to think," she stammered. "You have until tomorrow," Zaid replied, his tone cool. "But opportunities like this don't come twice." Amira couldn't sleep that night. She paced her tiny apartment, the contract Zaid had handed her sitting untouched on the coffee table. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Farid. "Amira, if there's any hope of saving this hospital, we need it now. Tomorrow may be too late." Amira sank into the couch, her head in her hands. The weight of the decision threatened to crush her. She thought of the families who relied on the hospital, the children who would have nowhere to go if the doors closed. But could she give up her freedom, even temporarily, for the sake of her work? Her gaze fell on the photo of her late husband, Adil. His smile was frozen in time, a bittersweet reminder of what she'd lost. "What would you do, Adil?" she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. By morning, her decision was made. The office where Zaid waited was as pristine and intimidating as the man himself. Amira stood outside the door for several moments, gathering her courage. Finally, she pushed it open. "Miss Khalid." Zaid greeted her, rising from his seat. His sharp eyes scanned her face, as if he already knew her answer. "Have you made your decision?" "I have," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll do it." Zaid nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Then let's discuss the terms." The contract was laid out before her, every word meticulously crafted. Amira read through it with painstaking care, noting clauses that ensured her anonymity, financial support for the hospital, and details about her role as Layla's caregiver. "What happens when the contract ends?" she asked, looking up. "You'll be free to leave," Zaid replied. No strings attached. His tone was businesslike, but Amira couldn't shake the sense that there was more beneath the surface. "And Layla," she pressed. "She'll remain under my care," Zaid said, his voice softening slightly. "You'll help her adjust, but her future is here, with me." The conversation ended with Amira signing the contract, her hand trembling as she put pen to paper. Zaid studied her, his expression unreadable. "You've made the right choice," he said simply. Amira wanted to believe him, but as she left his office, the weight of what she'd agreed to settled heavily on her shoulders. Amira stood at the base of the grand staircase leading to Zaid Al-Fad's estate, her breath catching as she took in the sprawling mansion before her. The desert wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of warm sand and blooming jasmine. She clutched her single suitcase tightly, feeling dwarfed by the sheer scale of the ornate building. The mansion was an architectural marvel, a blend of modern glass facades and traditional Arab design. Massive archways framed intricately carved doors, while golden domes glinted in the late afternoon sun. Inside, the air was cool, scented with oud, and unnervingly quiet. A man in a tailored suit approached her as she stepped through the entrance. "Miss Khalid," he said curtly, bowing slightly. "I'm Rashid, Mr. Al-Fad's advisor. I'll show you to your quarters." Amira followed him through a maze of hallways adorned with vibrant tapestries and gilded mirrors. She couldn't help but feel out of place. The grandeur of the estate was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the modest apartment she'd left behind. "This will be your room," Rashid said, opening a door to reveal a spacious suite. The room was beautifully decorated, with a four-poster bed draped in silk and a window offering a stunning view of the desert dunes. "Thank you," Amira said quietly, setting her suitcase down. "Mr. Al-Fad is in his study," Rashid continued, his tone neutral. "He will see you after you've settled in. The child, Layla, is currently in the garden." "The child," Amira repeated softly, her mind drifting to the reason she was here. She unpacked quickly, her nerves mounting as she thought about meeting Layla. Would the little girl resent her? Would Zaid's cold demeanor extend to her interactions with his niece? She smoothed her dress and stepped out into the garden. The garden was lush, bursting with colorful flowers and shaded by palm trees. Amid the greenery, a small figure sat on a bench, her head bent over a book. "Layla," Amira called softly. The girl looked up, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. She couldn't have been older than 7, with her long, dark hair braided neatly down her back. "Yes," Layla said cautiously. "Who are you?" Amira crouched to meet her at eye level. "I'm Amira. I'm here to take care of you." Layla studied her for a moment before nodding. "Okay. Do you like stories?" "I love stories," Amira replied with a smile. "What are you reading?" "The Little Prince," Layla said, holding up the book. It was Mama's favorite. Amira's heart ached at the mention of the girl's mother. "It's one of my favorites, too," she said gently. Layla's face softened, and she scooted over to make space on the bench. Amira joined her, and they began reading together. Later that evening, Amira sat in Zaid's study, the tension between them palpable. The room was a stark reflection of its owner, immaculate, with dark wood furniture and bookshelves lined with volumes on business and history. Zaid sat behind his desk, his gaze steady as he regarded her. "How did Layla take to you?" he asked, his tone clipped. "She seems sweet," Amira replied. "We read together in the garden." Zaid's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained distant. "Good. She needs stability." Amira hesitated before asking, what was she like before she lost her parents? For a moment, Zaid's composure faltered. "She was bright, full of energy. My wife adored her. After their deaths," he trailed off, his voice tight. "She's been withdrawn. I'll do my best to help her," Amira said softly. Zaid nodded, clearing his throat. You should also be prepared for my family's reaction to this arrangement. Amira frowned. What do you mean? They won't approve of you, Zaid said bluntly. They'll see this as a betrayal of our traditions. Then why choose me? Amira asked, frustration creeping into her voice. Because you're different, Zaid replied simply. You don't come with the expectations someone from my world would. You can focus on what matters, Layla. The word stung, but Amira bit back her retort. It was clear Zaid saw her as little more than a solution to his problems. Over the next few days, Amira settled into her new role, balancing her time between caring for Layla and navigating the complexities of life in Zaid's household. She quickly learned that her every move was scrutinized, not just by the staff, but also by members of Zaid's family who visited frequently. One afternoon, she found herself cornered by Zaid's elder sister, Mariam, a woman whose elegant attire and piercing gaze were as sharp as her words. So you're the nurse, Mariam said, her tone dripping with disdain. I am, Amira replied evenly. Do you really think you belong here? Mariam asked, her voice cold. Amira stood her ground. I'm here for Layla. That's what matters. Mariam smirked. We'll see how long that lasts. Amira's encounters with Zaid's family left her drained, but she refused to let their hostility deter her. Her focus remained on Layla, whose laughter had begun to return in small, precious moments. One evening, as Amira helped Layla with her bedtime routine, the girl looked up at her and said, I think Mama would have liked you. The words caught Amira off guard, filling her with a mix of gratitude and sadness. That means a lot to me, Layla, she said, brushing the girl's hair back gently. Later, as she sat alone in her room, Amira reflected on the weight of the expectations placed on her, not just by Zaid, but by his family and even herself. Could she truly make a difference here? Or was she simply a placeholder in a life that would never fully accept her? The soft hum of desert winds filled the garden as Amira sat cross-legged on a woven mat, watching Layla attempt to paint. The girl's small fingers clutched a brush dipped in vibrant red, her brows furrowed in concentration. What are you painting? Amira asked gently. It's a sunset, Layla replied, her tone matter-of-fact. She pointed to the streaks of orange and yellow on the paper. It's how I remember it with Mama and Papa. Amira's heart clenched. She had spent enough time with Layla to see how deeply the child missed her parents. Yet, in these quiet moments of creativity, Layla seemed more at ease. That's beautiful, Amira said, offering her an encouraging smile. You have a great eye for colors. Layla grinned, the first genuine smile Amira had seen that day. It was moments like these that made her feel like she could truly help the little girl heal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Zaid appeared in the garden, his tall frame silhouetted against the golden light. He walked toward them with measured steps, his gaze flickering between Layla and Amira. She's been spending a lot of time outdoors lately, Zaid said, addressing Amira. That's good. She's doing better, Amira replied. But I think she still feels lost. Zaid's expression softened. I've done what I can, but I'm not equipped to give her what she needs emotionally. Amira hesitated before responding. You're doing your best. That's what matters. For the first time, Zaid seemed to drop his guarded demeanor. Thank you, he said quietly. The days blended into a routine. Amira and Layla grew closer, their bond strengthening with each shared activity. Yet, the rest of Zaid's household remained a source of tension. Mariam's disdain for Amira was palpable, and other family members seemed to share her sentiment. They whispered behind closed doors, questioning Zaid's decision to marry a woman so far removed from their world. One evening, Amira overheard a conversation between Mariam and Rashid. She's an outsider, Mariam said sharply. What does she know about our ways? About what Layla needs? She's here because Zaid trusts her, Rashid replied. Mariam scoffed. Trust or desperation? Amira felt the sting of those words, but chose to remain silent. She knew she couldn't change their opinions overnight. Instead, she focused on proving her worth through her actions. That night, as she tucked Layla into bed, the little girl whispered, You're not going to leave, right? Amira blinked, startled by the question. Of course not, Layla. I'm here for you. Promise. Layla asked, her voice trembling. I promise, Amira said, holding the child close. Amira woke early the next morning, her mind racing with thoughts about the days ahead. She had promised Layla she wouldn't leave, but the weight of those words settled heavily on her chest. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. Rashid stood outside, his expression unreadable. Mr. Al-Fad would like to see you in his study, he said curtly. Amira nodded, following Rashid through the sprawling hallways. Zaid's study was a place she had come to associate with tension, and today was no different. Zaid was seated behind his desk, his sharp features illuminated by the morning light streaming through the window. He gestured for her to sit. There's something you should see, he said, sliding a small, weathered box across the desk toward her. Amira hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, letters, and a delicate bracelet, a child's bracelet. These belonged to Layla's mother, Zaid explained. She kept them for Layla to have someday. I thought, perhaps you could share these with her. Help her feel connected to her parents. Amira's throat tightened. The gesture was unexpected, and it revealed a side of Zaid she hadn't seen before, a man struggling to bridge the gap between his niece's loss and her future. Of course, Amira said softly. Zaid nodded, his gaze distant. She was an incredible woman. Layla adored her. I failed to protect them both. The raw vulnerability in his voice took Amira by surprise. You didn't fail them, she said gently. You're doing everything you can for Layla now. That's what matters. Later that day, Amira sat with Layla in the garden, the box of memories between them. What's that? Layla asked curiously. Amira smiled. It's something very special. Your mama kept these for you. Layla's eyes widened as she carefully sifted through the contents of the box. She held up the bracelet, her small fingers tracing its delicate design. Mama used to wear this, Layla said, her voice filled with wonder. She wanted you to have it, Amira said. For the first time, Layla's tears were accompanied by a smile. That evening, Amira found herself back in the study. Zaid was seated by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. She smiled, Amira said, breaking the silence. She cried, but she smiled too. Zaid turned to her, his expression unreadable. Thank you for being here. For her. It's what I promised to do, Amira replied. Zaid nodded, but there was something in his eyes, something that hinted at a depth of gratitude he couldn't yet put into words. The following week, the household seemed to pulse with tension. Amira had grown accustomed to the subtle glances and whispered remarks from the staff and Zaid's family, but Miriam's disdain was becoming harder to ignore. Amira sat in the parlor one afternoon, helping Layla with her homework. The girl was beginning to blossom under her care, her smiles more frequent, her voice brighter. Layla, Miriam's sharp voice cut through the room as she entered. Her eyes landed on Amira, narrowing slightly. Shouldn't you be practicing your reading instead of wasting time? I already practiced, Layla replied, her tone defensive. Amira's helping me with math now. Miriam's lips thinned. Math. That's your excuse to spend all day with her. Amira took a deep breath, forcing a calm expression. Layla is making great progress. She's a bright child. I wasn't speaking to you, Miriam snapped. Miriam. Zaid's voice interrupted from the doorway. He stepped into the room, his presence commanding as ever. Is there a reason you're questioning my decisions regarding Layla's care? Miriam's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. I'm simply looking out for the family, Zaid. You've brought an outsider into our home. What do you expect people think? Zaid's gaze hardened. I expect them to respect my decisions. Amira is here because I trust her, and because she's what Layla needs right now. Amira's heart raced as she listened, a mix of gratitude and discomfort washing over her. Later that evening, Amira found herself standing in the garden, the cool desert breeze providing a welcome reprieve from the stifling atmosphere of the house. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Zaid approaching. "Thank you for defending me earlier," Amira said, her voice quiet. Zaid nodded, his expression softening. "You didn't deserve that. Mariam means well, but she can be difficult." Amira hesitated before speaking. "Does your family always interfere like this?" "Always," Zaid admitted with a small, humorless smile. "They see it as their duty to protect the family's image. But I make my own decisions." Amira studied him for a moment. There was a weariness in his voice that spoke of years of carrying burdens alone. "You're doing the right thing for Layla," she said. Zaid met her gaze, his eyes lingering on hers. "And for you, do you think this arrangement is the right thing for you?" The question caught her off guard. She didn't have an answer, not yet. The household buzzed with activity as preparations for a formal family dinner were underway. Amira had been told that the event was a long-standing tradition, a gathering of the Al-Fad family to discuss matters of business and legacy. "You'll need to attend," Rashid informed her that morning. "As Zaid's wife, your presence is expected." Amira felt a pang of anxiety. She had no illusions about her standing within the family, and the thought of sitting at a table with Mariam and the others was daunting. As the evening approached, she donned the dress Rashid had arranged for her, a flowing emerald gown that clung to her frame in a way that felt both elegant and foreign. She caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The dining room was a masterpiece of opulence, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over a long, mahogany table set with gold-trimmed plates. Amira felt the weight of every gaze as she entered, her steps faltering under the scrutiny. "Ah, the nurse," Mariam said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as Amira took her seat beside Zaid. "Mariam," Zaid warned, his tone low. "What? Am I not allowed to acknowledge your presence?" Mariam replied, feigning innocence. Amira clenched her fists under the table, willing herself to remain calm. The dinner progressed with tense conversations about family investments and legacy, topics that made Amira feel even more like an outsider. As dessert was served, Mariam leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Amira. "Tell me, Miss Khalid, do you think you're capable of understanding our world? Or is this just a temporary arrangement for you?" Amira froze, her face burning. Before she could respond, Zaid's voice cut through the room. "That's enough, Mariam," he said firmly. Mariam raised an eyebrow. "I'm simply asking a question, and I'm telling you to stop," Zaid replied, his tone icy. He turned to the rest of the table. "Amira is here because I chose her to be. Anyone who has a problem with that can speak to me directly." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Later, in the quiet of the night, Amira found Zaid in his study, staring out the window. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly. "Because it was necessary," Zaid replied, turning to face her. "I won't allow anyone to question your place here." Amira searched his eyes, seeing a sincerity that unsettled her. "Thank you," she said. Zaid nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before returning to the view outside. The sun cast long shadows over the sprawling estate as Amira wandered through the quiet hallways. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life in the mansion, but there were still corners of this world that felt alien to her. One day, while helping Layla organize her toys, Amira stumbled upon a box tucked away in a closet. It was a simple wooden box, its surface worn with age. "What's this?" Amira asked, holding it up. Layla's eyes lit up with recognition. "That's Mama's box. Uncle Zaid said I shouldn't open it without him." Amira nodded, setting it aside for now. But the curiosity lingered. Later that evening, after Layla had gone to bed, Amira found Zaid in his study. The room, with its dark wood and shelves of books, always felt like a reflection of its owner, imposing yet filled with hidden depths. "I found something while helping Layla," Amira began hesitantly. A box, she said, belonged to her mother. Zaid's expression shifted, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Yes," he said quietly, "it was my wife's. She wanted Layla to have it when she was older." Amira approached the desk, her voice gentle. "Maybe it's time to show it to her. It could help her feel connected to her parents." Zaid was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. She should have it." The next afternoon, Zaid joined Amira and Layla in the garden. He carried the box, his movements careful, as if it contained something fragile. Layla's eyes widened when she saw it. "Is that Mama's box?" Zaid crouched beside her, his voice soft. "It is. She kept this for you because she wanted you to remember her and your father." Amira watched as Zaid opened the box, revealing its contents. Inside were photographs, letters, and small trinkets, a bracelet, a pressed flower, a keychain. Layla picked up each item with reverence, her fingers lingering on a photograph of her parents. "That's Mama and Papa," Layla said, her voice trembling. "They loved you very much," Zaid said, his tone filled with emotion. As Layla explored the box, Amira glanced at Zaid. His stoic exterior had cracked, revealing a man burdened by grief and guilt. "She's happy," Amira whispered. "She deserves to be," Zaid replied, his eyes fixed on Layla. The peace of the following days was shattered by an unwelcome intrusion. It started with a single headline in a tabloid: "Reclusive Sheik marries mysterious nurse. Love or convenience?" Amira saw the article while scrolling through her phone. Her stomach sank as she read the speculative piece, which included a grainy photo of her walking with Layla in the garden. Before she could process it, Rashid appeared at her door, his expression tense. "Mr. Alfad wants to see you in the study." Now, Amira followed him, dread pooling in her stomach. When she entered the study, Zaid was pacing, the tabloid spread out on his desk. "How did this get out?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "I don't know," Amira replied, her hands clenched at her sides. Zaid exhaled, his tone softening slightly. "I'm not accusing you, but this complicates things. The media will be relentless now." "What do we do?" Amira asked, her voice small. Zaid stopped pacing and turned to her. "We stay calm. This is exactly the kind of distraction my family will use against us. So we need to present a united front." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Reporters gathered outside the estate, and every move Amira made seemed to be under scrutiny. Zaid's staff worked tirelessly to control the narrative, but the damage had already been done. One evening, as Amira sat in her room, there was a knock at the door. Zaid entered, his expression weary. "I'm sorry about all of this," he said, gesturing to the window, where the glow of camera flashes could be seen in the distance. "It's not your fault," Amira said. "I just hate that Layla is being dragged into this." Zaid sat down across from her, his gaze steady. "Layla's resilience comes from her mother. And now, from you. She'll get through this." Amira studied him for a moment, surprised by the depth of his words. "Thank you," she said softly. Zaid nodded, his voice quiet. "We'll get through it together." The atmosphere in the mansion remained tense in the days following the media frenzy, but there were small moments of respite. Amira had noticed that the more time Zaid spent with Layla, the more the girl seemed to regain the spark she'd lost. It was on one of these quieter days that Zaid proposed a trip to an oasis outside the city. "It will be good for Layla," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "And for you." Amira hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could handle another change of scenery, but Layla's excitement was contagious. The girl practically bounced through the halls as the household prepared for the outing. The oasis was breathtaking. Palm trees framed a pool of crystal-clear water, their reflections shimmering on the surface. Birds chirped in the canopy above, and the scent of blooming flowers hung in the air. "This place is magical," Amira murmured, taking it all in. "It was my wife's favorite," Zaid said quietly, standing beside her. "We used to come here with Layla before everything." Amira glanced at him, noting the distant look in his eyes. "It must be hard for you to come back." Zaid nodded, his gaze fixed on Layla, who was playing by the water's edge. "It is, but it's worth it if it helps her heal." As the day wore on, Amira found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving at the mansion. She and Zaid took turns playing with Layla, their laughter echoing across the oasis. For a brief moment, It felt like they were a family, not bound by contracts or circumstance, but by something deeper. That evening, as they prepared to leave, Layla tugged on Amira's sleeve. "Thank you for coming with us," the girl said, her voice shy. Amira crouched to her level, smiling. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Layla threw her arms around Amira, hugging her tightly. Over Layla's shoulder, Amira saw Zaid watching them, a faint smile on his face. As they drove back to the mansion under the glow of the setting sun, Amira couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between her and Zaid. The warmth of the oasis lingered for a few days, but reality soon reasserted itself. Zaid's family began pressuring him again, their thinly veiled criticisms growing louder with each passing week. Amira overheard Mariam and Rashid in the hallway one afternoon. "She's getting too comfortable," Mariam said, her tone sharp. "This arrangement was supposed to be temporary. What happens when she oversteps her roles?" "Zaid seems to trust her," Rashid replied cautiously. "Trust isn't enough," Mariam snapped. "She doesn't belong here." Amira clenched her fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. She wanted to confront them, to demand respect, but she knew it would only make things worse. Later that evening, Amira found Zaid in the study, his expression tense. "Your sister isn't subtle," she said, her voice carefully measured. Zaid sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mariam has always been protective of the family. She doesn't like change." "That's an understatement," Amira replied, crossing her arms. Zaid looked at her, his gaze softening. "I'll handle her. You shouldn't have to deal with this." Amira hesitated before speaking. "Sometimes I wonder if this was a mistake. If being here is doing more harm than good." Zaid's eyes darkened. "Don't say that. You've been good for Layla. For me. I won't let my family push you away." His words were firm, but Amira couldn't ignore the lingering doubts in her own heart. Over the next few days, Amira found herself pulling back. She spent more time in her room, avoiding confrontations and focusing on her responsibilities with Layla. One afternoon, while reading in the garden, Layla looked up at her. "Are you mad at Uncle Zaid?" Amira blinked, startled by the question. "No, of course not. Why would you think that?" "Because you don't talk to him as much anymore," Layla said simply. Amira forced a smile. "Sometimes grown-ups get busy, that's all." But Layla's words lingered, stirring an ache in Amira's chest. The turning point came one evening when Zaid knocked on her door. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Amira stepped aside to let him in, her heart pounding. "You've been distant," Zaid said, his voice calm but insistent. "Is it something I've done?" Amira hesitated, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. "It's not you, Zaid. It's everything. Your family, the media, this whole arrangement. It's overwhelming." Zaid nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I understand, but I need you to know something. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The sincerity in his voice was disarming, and for the first time in weeks, Amira felt a glimmer of hope. Amira woke to the sound of the desert wind howling against the windows, the early morning sun barely piercing through the curtains. The mansion, as grand as it was, often felt too large, too quiet, especially during moments like this. Her routine had settled into a predictable rhythm, but something about this morning felt different. As she walked through the hallways toward a kitchen, she noticed Zaid sitting in the living room, an open letter in his hands and a faraway look in his eyes. "Good morning," Amira said cautiously, not wanting to disturb him. Zaid looked up, startled, and quickly folded the letter. "Morning," he replied, his tone clipped. Amira hesitated, then nodded toward the letter. "Is everything all right?" Zaid's jaw tightened. "It's from my father. Another reminder of what they expect from me." Amira frowned, sitting across from him. "What do they expect this time?" Zaid exhaled deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "To end this arrangement, for starters. They believe it's damaging the family's image." Amira's chest tightened. "Do you think they're right?" Zaid's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "No. What we're doing, for Layla, for us, it's worth more than their opinions." The words carried more weight than she expected, and for a moment, she saw a vulnerability in Zaid that he rarely showed. Later that day, while organizing some papers in the study, Amira came across a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of books. Curious, she opened it and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was Adil's, her late husband's. Her breath caught as she flipped through the pages. The journal contained notes, letters he had written to her but never sent, and reflections on their life together. One entry in particular caught her attention. "Amira, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the chance to tell you how proud I am of you. You've always been the strongest person I know, and I hope you never forget that. Wherever life takes you, remember that you deserve happiness." Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the journal to her chest. It was as though Adil had left her a message from beyond, reminding her to move forward. That evening, as she sat with Zaid in the garden, she decided to share what she had found. "I came across something today," she began, her voice shaky. "A journal from my late husband." Zaid's brows furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. "He wrote things I didn't know, about how much he believed in me, how he wanted me to find happiness even after he was gone," Amira continued. Zaid's voice was gentle when he replied. "It sounds like he cared for you deeply." "He did," Amira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And reading his words, it reminded me that I can't keep holding on to the past. I need to make room for the present." The sincerity in her tone struck Zaid, and he nodded. "The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us." The mansion was unusually quiet the next morning. Amira had woken early to spend some time reflecting on her conversation with Zaid. She hadn't expected to find herself so vulnerable with him, but it felt right. As she made her way to the garden, she saw Layla sitting by the fountain, her small hands clutching a photo from her mother's box. "Good morning, Layla," Amira said softly, sitting beside her. "What do you have there?" "It's Mama and me," Layla replied, holding up the picture. "She used to take me to the park every Saturday." Amira smiled. "That sounds lovely. Do you miss her a lot?" Layla nodded. "But I think she'd like you. You make me feel safe." The words hit Amira like a wave. She reached out to gently brush a strand of hair from Layla's face. "That means the world to me, Layla." Later that day, Zaid called Amira to his study. When she entered, he gestured for her to sit, his expression serious but not unkind. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Zaid began, "about letting go of the past and making room for the present." Amira nodded, unsure where he was going. "I've spent so much time trying to honor the memory of my wife that I've neglected to focus on what Layla and I need now," he admitted. "I think it's time to make some changes." Amira tilted her head. "What kind of changes?" "For starters, I want you to be more involved in decisions about Layla's upbringing," Zaid said. "You've already done so much for her, and it's clear she looks up to you. I trust your judgment." Amira was taken aback. "Zaid, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll continue to be here for her," Zaid replied simply. Amira smiled. "I will. Of course, I will." That evening, as the household prepared for another formal dinner, Amira felt a renewed sense of purpose. She dressed carefully, knowing the gathering would likely include members of Zaid's family who still disapproved of her presence. As she descended the staircase, she caught sight of Zaid waiting at the bottom. His gaze lingered on her for a moment before he offered his arm. "You look stunning," he said, his tone sincere. "Thank you," Amira replied, her cheeks flushing. The dinner was as tense as she'd expected. Maria made several thinly veiled comments about Amira's temporary status, but Zaid's unwavering support kept her grounded. When the meal ended, Zaid stood and addressed the room. "I'd like to make something clear," he began, his voice firm. "Amira is not just here as a convenience. She's an integral part of this family now, and I won't tolerate anyone treating her otherwise." Amira's heart raced as the room fell silent. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. The morning sun cast a golden hue across the mansion's expansive grounds as Amira prepared for an unexpected outing. Zaid had decided they needed a change of scenery, a chance to escape the lingering tensions in the house. "We're going to the retreat," Zaid announced over breakfast. "The retreat?" Amira asked, curiosity piqued. "It's a private estate in the desert," Zaid explained. "A place for reflection and quiet. I used to go there with my wife and Layla." Amira hesitated, unsure of how she felt about stepping into a space so steeped in his memories. "Are you sure it's the right time?" "It's exactly the right time," Zaid replied. "For Layla. And for us." The journey to the retreat was a stark reminder of the desert's beauty. The car sped along endless dunes, the golden sand stretching as far as the eye could see. Layla sat between them, her face pressed against the window, marveling at the landscape. "Is it far?" Layla asked, her voice filled with excitement. "Not much longer," Zaid replied, a rare smile playing on his lips. When they arrived, Amira was struck by the retreat's tranquility. It was a sprawling villa, smaller than the mansion, but no less elegant. A large courtyard surrounded a shimmering pool, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. "This is beautiful," Amira murmured as she stepped out of the car. "It's peaceful," Zaid said. "That's what matters." Over the next few days, Amira began to see another side of Zaid. He was more relaxed here, his usual guarded demeanor softening in the retreat's serenity. He spent hours with Layla, teaching her how to swim in the pool and telling her stories about the stars they gazed at each night. One evening, as they sat around a small fire under the vast desert sky, Layla fell asleep against Zaid's shoulder. Amira watched the scene, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. "She's happy here," Amira said softly. Zaid nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "She's starting to heal. I can see it in her eyes." "You're a good father figure to her," Amira said, her voice filled with sincerity. Zaid turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I'm trying, but I couldn't have done this without you, Amira. You've brought something into her life, and mine, that I didn't know we needed." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Amira found herself at a loss for how to respond. For the first time, she felt like more than just a temporary fixture in their lives. The retreat's tranquility was short-lived. On the final day of their stay, Zaid received a call from Mariam. "You can't keep ignoring the family's concerns," Mariam said sharply. "This arrangement of yours is drawing too much attention." Zaid's jaw tightened as he listened. When the call ended, he turned to Amira, his frustration evident. "Mariam won't let this go," he said. "She's determined to undermine everything we've built here." Amira frowned. "What does she want?" "For me to end this arrangement and find someone more suitable," Zaid replied bitterly. Amira hesitated before speaking. "Do you think she's right?" Zaid's eyes locked onto hers. "No, but I also know that something needs to change. This arrangement isn't fair to you." "What do you mean?" Amira asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "I want to revise the terms of our agreement," Zaid said. "I don't want this to feel like a contract anymore. I want you to have more freedom, more say in what happens moving forward." Amira's breath caught. She had never expected Zaid to acknowledge her role in such a meaningful way. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm certain," Zaid replied. "You're more than just someone filling a role, Amira. You're part of this family now." Back at the mansion, the changes Zaid had promised began to take shape. Amira was given more autonomy in decisions regarding Layla's care, and Zaid began involving her in discussions about the household. But the biggest shift came one evening when Zaid gathered the family for a meeting. "I want to address something," he began, his tone firm. "Amira is not a temporary part of this household. She has proven time and again that she is invaluable to Layla's well-being and to mine. I expect her to be treated with the respect she deserves." The room was silent as Zaid's words sank in. Mariam's expression was unreadable, but Amira could feel the tension radiating from her. After the meeting, Zaid found Amira in the garden. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Surprised," Amira admitted. "But grateful." Zaid nodded. "Good. Because this is just the beginning." The week following Zaid's announcement brought both relief and new challenges for Amira. While Zaid's open defense of her solidified her place in the household, it also intensified Mariam's hostility. The whispers among the staff grew quieter, but the tension in family gatherings was palpable. One afternoon, Amira sat with Layla in the library, helping the girl with her reading. Layla was improving rapidly, her confidence growing with each session. Uncle Zaid said, "I could pick out any book I want for my collection," Layla said, her eyes shining. "That's wonderful," Amira replied. "Which one are you thinking of?" "I don't know yet," Layla admitted, giggling. "Maybe something about adventures." Their laughter was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Mariam appeared in the doorway, her expression cold. "Layla, go find Rashid," Mariam said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Layla hesitated, looking to Amira for reassurance. "It's okay, Layla," Amira said gently. "I'll see you later." Once Layla was gone, Mariam stepped into the room, her gaze narrowing. "You've done well to ingratiate yourself here," Mariam said, her voice dripping with disdain. Amira stood her ground. "I'm here for Layla and Zaid. That's all that matters." Mariam smirked. "You think this will last? That you've truly secured a place in this family?" "I'm not trying to secure anything," Amira replied firmly. "I'm doing what's best for Layla." Mariam leaned closer, her tone sharp. "You don't belong here, and you never will. Mark my words." Later that evening, Zaid found Amira in the garden. She was pacing, her frustration evident. "Mariam confronted you, didn't she?" Zaid asked. Amira nodded. "She doesn't think I belong here." Zaid's expression darkened. "She doesn't decide who belongs. I do, and I won't let her undermine you. You can't protect me from everything, Zaid," Amira said quietly. "I can try," he replied, his voice filled with determination. Amira looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, but I can handle her." Zaid's lips curved into a small smile. "I don't doubt that for a second." The following days brought unexpected developments. Zaid's father, Sheik Khaled, announced that he would be visiting the estate. The news sent ripples through the household, with everyone scrambling to prepare. "He's the one you'll need to impress," Rashid warned Amira. Amira felt a knot form in her stomach. She had faced Mariam's hostility, but the prospect of meeting Zaid's father was far more daunting. When Sheik Khaled arrived, his presence was as commanding as Zaid's, though tempered by years of experience. His sharp eyes assessed everyone in the room as he greeted them. When his gaze landed on Amira, he paused. "So, you're the nurse," he said, his tone neutral. "Yes, sir," Amira replied, keeping her voice steady. "She's done more for Layla than anyone else could," Zaid interjected, his tone firm. Sheik Khaled raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, with the family gathered around a long table. Amira sat beside Zaid, feeling the weight of Sheik Khaled's occasional glances. As the meal progressed, Sheik Khaled spoke. "Zaid, you've made some unorthodox decisions in recent months." "I've made decisions that are best for Layla," Zaid replied evenly. "And for yourself," Sheik Khaled pressed. "Have you considered the long-term consequences of this arrangement?" "I have," Zaid said, his tone unwavering. "And I stand by my choices." Amira felt a surge of admiration for Zaid's confidence, but the tension in the room was suffocating. After dinner, Sheik Khaled requested a private meeting with Zaid and Amira. The three of them sat in the study, the air thick with unspoken questions. "Amira," Sheik Khaled began, "why did you agree to this arrangement?" Amira took a deep breath. "Because I wanted to help. Layla needed someone, and I knew I could make a difference." Sheik Khaled studied her, his expression unreadable. "And do you believe you've succeeded?" "I do," Amira replied firmly. "Layla is happier, stronger, and more confident. That's all I've ever wanted." Sheik Khaled leaned back in his chair, his gaze shifting to Zaid. "You've chosen well," he said finally. "But this isn't just about Layla. The legacy of our family is at stake." "It always is," Zaid replied. "But I won't sacrifice Layla's happiness, or mine, for the sake of appearances." Sheik Khaled nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his eyes. Very well. But remember, Zaid, the path you've chosen is not without challenges. When the meeting ended, Amira felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. Do you think he'll support us? She asked Zaid as they walked through the halls. He'll tolerate it, Zaid replied. And that's enough for now. Amira smiled, her faith in Zaid growing stronger with each passing day. Amira sat in the garden under the twilight sky, the air cool against her skin. The events of the past weeks had left her emotionally drained yet hopeful. Zaid's unwavering support, even in the face of his family's disapproval, had begun to shift something inside her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She turned to see Zaid approaching, his expression unreadable. Amira, he said, his voice softer than usual. Do you have a moment? Of course, she replied, setting down the book she'd been reading. Zaid hesitated before sitting beside her. For a moment, he simply stared at the horizon, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. I've been thinking a lot about us, Zaid began, his tone measured. About how far we've come since the day you agreed to this arrangement. Amira's heart pounded in her chest. What about it? Zaid turned to face her, his eyes earnest. When this started, it was just a contract, something practical and necessary. But it's become so much more than that. You've become so much more. Amira's breath caught. She wasn't sure where he was going, but the intensity in his gaze left no room for doubt. I don't want this to be just an arrangement anymore, Zaid continued. I want it to be real. For you, for me, and for Layla. Amira blinked, her mind racing. What are you saying, Zaid? I'm saying that I want us to be a family, he said, his voice steady. Not because of a contract, but because it's what feels right. Amira's eyes filled with tears as she processed his words. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Zaid replied. Amira, will you marry me? For real this time? The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Zaid insisted on a small, private ceremony, wanting to keep the focus on their newfound bond rather than the expectations of his family. Layla was overjoyed when they told her the news. Does this mean you're staying forever? She asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Amira knelt to Layla's level, smiling. Yes, it does. Layla threw her arms around Amira, and for the first time, Amira truly felt like she belonged. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The ceremony was held in the mansion's garden, with only a handful of close friends and family in attendance. Amira's heart swelled as she walked down the aisle, her gaze locked on Zaid's. You look beautiful, Zaid whispered as she reached him. Thank you, Amira replied, her voice trembling with emotion. As they exchanged vows, Amira felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by a sense of hope and belonging she hadn't felt in years. The weeks following the wedding were filled with a sense of joy and renewal. The household, once tense and divided, began to feel like a true home. Even Mariam, while still reserved, had softened her stance toward Amira. One afternoon, Zaid gathered the household in the grand living room. I have an announcement, he said, his tone filled with excitement. Amira and I have decided to expand the hospital she's been working so hard to support. It will be a joint project, one that reflects our commitment to this family and this community. Amira's eyes widened. Zaid, are you serious? Completely, Zaid replied, smiling. It's the least we can do. The room erupted in applause, and Amira felt tears sting her eyes. She had always dreamed of making a lasting impact, and now, with Zaid's help, that dream was becoming a reality. As the months passed, the new wing of the hospital began to take shape. Amira threw herself into the project, working closely with Zaid to ensure every detail was perfect. Layla often joined them, her laughter filling the air as she played among the construction site's workers. One evening, as the three of them sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Layla climbed onto Zaid's lap. Are we happy now? Layla asked, her voice sleepy. Zaid smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Yes, we are. Amira reached for Zaid's hand, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The grand opening of the hospital's new wing was a celebration unlike any other. The community turned out in droves, their gratitude evident in every handshake and hug. As Amira stood beside Zaid, accepting their congratulations, she felt a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. "This is just the beginning," Zaid said, leaning close to her. Amira nodded, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I couldn't have done this without you, and I couldn't have done it without you," Zaid replied. That night, as they tucked Layla into bed, she whispered, "I think Mama and Papa would be happy." Amira's eyes filled with tears. "I think so too, Layla." As she and Zaid left Layla's room, Amira felt his arm wrap around her shoulders. "This is our family," Zaid said softly, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." Amira leaned into him, her heart full. For all the challenges they had faced, they had built something beautiful, a life, a family, and a future worth fighting for. Thank you for watching the story. If you enjoyed it, we kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our content. We would love to hear your thoughts about the story. Please share in the comments which part of the story had the most impact on you. Was it the emotional connection between the characters, the key turning points, or the resolution of the conflicts? We are always looking to bring you stories that resonate. If you have any ideas or themes you would like to see in future stories, let us know in the comments. Your suggestions are valuable and could inspire our next project. Thank you for being part of this journey, and we look forward to hearing from you. Stay tuned for more stories.